Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Steven Goes Live. I will wait a few minutes because I didn't really announce. I announced this one last week, but I didn't say exactly when I'd be going. I got sick last week, and then thankfully all better now, but got delayed a bit. So here I am, live, ready to talk about all things, I don't know, tech, and I'm excited to be here today. So I'll wait for a few more people to get in here, and then also remember there you can comment on StreamYard. I am going to read those comments as I go, so feel free to tell me what you want me to talk about, yell at me, tell me what's going on in your day, and really anything you want. Happy to keep this relatively conversational. Okay, get started and just give it maybe another 10 seconds or so, and I'll get started. I have a bunch of things that I want to talk about based on some feedback I got last week, but I'm also open to talk about really just about anything that's technical and interesting. So feel free to keep the comments coming, and feel free to follow up with questions or comments, agreements, disagreements, and anything that I say. Okay, with that, I think we have quorum. Let's get started. One of the really interesting developments since we spoke last in the Arbitrum ecosystem was the Arbitrum expansion pack. And this is the idea that for Arbitrum Orbit, previously you were limited to launching layer 3 chains only on Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova, basically only on chains that were the Arbitrum public chains. And if you wanted to go ahead and launch, say, an Arbitrum Layer 2, you had to go ahead and get an explicit license. So Offchain Labs could have given that license, but Offchain Labs hasn't. The way the process set out in the DAO was also able to give the license, and you have to go and talk to the DAO. And it turned out that there was some friction here because there were people that said, hey, we really want to have our own Layer 2, but like, I don't want to go talk to the DAO either because I don't want to, talk to the public about it yet. Like imagine like you're building like this private stealth layer 2, and now you have to go and like lay out all your plans in public to the DAO, Arbitrum DAO. That's not, necessarily doesn't work for everyone. And other people just thought that the process was, hey, just a little bit cumbersome. So the question was, I know Patrick McCory at the Arbitrum Foundation did a fantastic job, really just listening to members of the ecosystem. There were a bunch of DAO calls on this as well of how can we make this more efficient, and there was a general desire to make it more efficient. But the thing is, you still want alignment. You still, right? The problem is you don't want to say, you still want there to be alignment with the Arbitrum ecosystem. And that's one of the core goals here. So how can you be efficient in that? And the answer was the Arbitrum expansion pack. And what this did was it said, okay, you can still launch your Arbitrum L3s completely permissionlessly on Arbitrum 1, Arbitrum Nova. But two critical changes here, which I think are awesome. Number one is you can now launch an Arbitrum Layer 2 on Ethereum as part of this program. And what you're asked to do is you're asked to give a portion of the revenue back, 10% of the revenue back to the Arbitrum DAO and what's called the Developer Guild. So 8% to the DAO and 2% to the Developer Guild. And it's just like a self-serve option. So if you want like a better deal, you're like, I don't want to give any, right? You can still go talk to the DAO and get a deal for yourself. But if you just want a self-serve option, you can do that. And it actually creates really nice alignment. Because the idea is if you want to launch an L3 on Arbitrum 1 and Nova, you don't need an alignment. You're already aligned. You're literally building on Arbitrum 1 and Nova, and there's no fee there at all. You don't have to share anything back explicitly with the Arbitrum DAO. But if you're going ahead and launching a different layer 2, like the community, how do you get aligned with the community? And the answer is by doing this revenue sharing. And it's revenue sharing, so you don't have to pay. It's like you subtract out the L1 fees. So it's just basically, it's just like a net revenue that you'd have to share back. And I think it's a really great option for those that want to use the best technology stack, that's Arbitrum, to launch their layer 2 chain, want to launch a layer 2 chain and not a layer 3 chain, and don't want to have to go and talk about this publicly beforehand. And it's a fantastic option. Now, if that wasn't enough, there was one other thing added here, which is, well, let's say you're building on another blockchain. Maybe you're building on Base and you say, but I want to have a layer 3 and I want the best layer 3 technology available. That's still Arbitrum. How can you go ahead and do that? Before you couldn't, but the Arbitrum expansion pack allows you to do with the same deal as launching on Ethereum, allows you to launch anywhere in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it's still limited to the Ethereum ecosystem. You can't go ahead and do it outside the Ethereum ecosystem, but now there's inside Ethereum, you can launch on any chain you want. It doesn't have to be an Arbitrum chain even. I think that's super powerful. And I think actually, like, stepping back, the whole licensing model here is really powerful and really interesting, because historically there's been like this binary between open source and closed source. The idea is it can be available for people to use, it can be not available for people to use, and that's really all that there is. But one thing that Web3 enables is radically new licensing structures, because you have this community shared financial ability, this ability to share directly with the community. And now you could have like a community license, something that's well in between fully open source and fully closed source. So if the tech is open, source visible, anyone can look at it, anyone can actually use the tech. All they're asked to do is to build alignment with the community. So I think this is, like many things, radically reinvented by Web3. It's a really new licensing model that's, I think, just incredible. And I'm excited for it. And the idea that you can now launch Arbitrum chains on any chain is like awesome. And you can do these things now where I think we'll start seeing like custom interop between Orbit chains and different ecosystems that settle to different chains. And I think Arbitrum Orbit is going to be the de facto L3 solution and L2 solution in the Ethereum ecosystem. And I'm really, really excited to see this go live. There are currently 50 plus chains in development, I think 20 to 25 that have already announced, and many others that I'm aware of that are building Orbit chains, both L2s and L3s. I still think, by the way, there's a really strong case for building layer 3 chains, and that is the cost of onboarding is much, much lower, because instead of having to be on your own in the car as you go through the toll, you get on the bus and you basically, you get on the bus and you have lower costs. That's number one. The cost, I should say, that's not the cost of onboarding. That's the cost of like posting to Ethereum and settling, but also the cost of onboarding. Imagine your user has their funds in, say, Coinbase or Binance or some other exchange, and they want to get onto your new chain. Well, if you're a layer 2, they're going to have to, assuming you don't have direct exchange support, which you won't on day one. Although, by the way, shout out to Zai, who's the first Orbit chain to get direct exchange support from Binance, which is a fantastic accomplishment, and I think just shows how powerful Orbit can be. But anyway, most chains won't have direct exchange support on day one. And the idea is you're going to have to go via the layer underneath you. And if that's Ethereum, you're going to have to pay for 2 Ethereum transactions. One to get from the exchange, say Coinbase, to Ethereum. Then you're going to have to, on Ethereum, pay another transaction to go over the bridge to your L2. If you're on Arbitrum, if you're built on Arbitrum 1 as an L3, though, you can just go via Arbitrum. So your first you still have these 2 transactions, but the layer underneath you is much, much, much cheaper, which means for you, the cost of onboarding users to your chain is much, much lower. So I still think there's like a strong case for layer 3s, but it's not my decision. The point with Orbit is give people the tools that they need to build what they want to use. Some people want to build layer 2s. Some people want to build layer 3s. Some people might even want to build layer 3s on other chains other than Arbitrum 1 and Nova using the Arbitrum technology. And the Arbitrum expansion pack says to all of those, absolutely, we can support that. You can do that. As long as we're all building on Ethereum, we're on the same team, and we want to make the best technology available for you. So I'm super excited about the Arbitrum expansion pack. If this is your first time hearing about it, go ahead and take a look at the blog post as well as the tweet thread from maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And even better, go ahead and play around with it and do something different. Do something that no one else has done before with the Arbitrum Orbit stack. And it just makes innovation so easy and so possible. Hey, I'm seeing some comments here. GM Steven, GM, big fan. Thank you very much. And I'm a big fan of you. Let us move on to some other interesting topics. So when we're talking about Orbit, another one that comes up is interoperability. So my co-founder, Ed Felton, had a blog post where he talked about chain clusters. And let's get into that a little bit. So a lot of you have probably heard about this concept of a super chain, this like one chain that sort of does it all, and it's many chains at once. So everyone has their own chain, but they all share liquidity and you can move fast between each other. So Ed has a really good post in which he generalizes this to something called a chain cluster, which you could do, of course, with Arbitrum Orbit chains as well. And the idea is that different chains can sort of cluster themselves and say, we want to sort of act as one unit. And the nice thing, I guess the different thing about the Arbitrum Orbit community, there's not going to be one super chain cluster. There's just going to be different clusters that those can emerge. Now, why, you say? Why don't you just have a single chain cluster? And part of the reason is, what do you give up when you have a chain cluster, right? It's not just have your cake and eat it too. You give something up. And the answer is, say I have 2 chains, chain A and chain B, we'll call them. And you can go from chain A, you want to build a super cluster or a super chain to go from chain A to chain B faster than settlement time. So you can like send money and send ETH and send other assets across these chains back and forth. Well, if you're sending these faster than settlement time, they sort of have a shared security aspect to them, right? If I can have if I can, quickly get off of your chain, then it doesn't matter that my chain has like really, really strong security, but like I can sort of use your chain as a backdoor to get out of my chain and exit, and therefore my chain becomes only as secure as your chain. And this leads to a few things. It means you have to have some sort of shared governance, right? So I just said, hey, go take an Orbit chain and experiment with it as you want. But if you're in a super chain, if you and I are in the same super chain, I'm not just agnostic to what your experimentation. I want to take a look at your code. I want to read it really carefully because remember, we have weakest link security. My chain is only as secure as your chain because we've linked our chains together in such a way that users can quickly get back and forth. So if there's a hack on your chain, it's going to pollute my chain as well. And that's a really important thing. So users lose the ability to customize. They lose the ability to govern themselves potentially. Now, what it means is they need to trust each other's governance. So you could say, okay, we'll just govern everyone. You could just say, okay, these chains trust each other's governance. I think it makes a lot of sense in the context of a few chains can get together and decide, hey, we trust each other's code and each other's governance. But I think a generic, universal, one for all super chain concept doesn't make that much sense because it just limits all these chains to single governance, to a single, more restricted code base, potentially unnecessarily. And also like things like alternative data availability. These become very problematic because, if I have one chain that posts all my data to Ethereum and you have a chain in my super chain cluster that uses alternative data availability, and let's say you use like not such a secure one and like something goes wrong, potentially a security issue there or even a liveness issue there can go ahead and affect my chain as well. And that's something that becomes problematic. So, you end up with like, again, the weakest link of all these chains. And I'm sure there are some smart people thinking about this and how you get past this. I know we're thinking a lot about this, but in Arbitrum land, you'll have different chain clusters, but not one to rule them all. And I think this is the best approach for giving people the flexibility and the customizability to do what they want and not limit their governance, not limit their ability to control themselves, control the code that they want, to innovate in ways that you might not want them to, but if we're different chains, they give them some of that freedom. One of the most interesting, I think, applications of a chain cluster is just a single chain that wants to shard itself, right? So we're not taking other chains and unifying them together. It's like, okay, I have like, take Arbitrum 1. Maybe Arbitrum 1 one day will say there's so much traffic here that maybe it creates a chain cluster of just all Arbitrum 1 chains and just have Arbitrum 1, 1, 2, 3, and you have a super chain cluster of Arbitrum 1 chains. That's a really interesting application. There you don't give up much because it's not like it is one chain. So the governance will be the same. The code will be the same. And you just basically get some more parallelization. So take a look at Ed's post on chain clusters, some very powerful ideas there, but also some, as we like to do, keeping it real moments where you have to really engage with this. And, these narratives of like, oh, you can do all these things and have everything together, everything's super and goes back and forth fast. There are trade-offs, and like everything else in crypto, and understanding those trade-offs is going to be the most powerful thing for you to really understand and be able to cut through some of the hype and build the best technology for you and your project. So that's on chain clusters. And generally, I should say in Arbitrum Orbit, we're looking to build interop all across the stack. We're working with Espresso on building shared sequencing for Orbit chains. And we're constantly looking and saying, how can we, using chain clusters or using less intrusive bridging, make the interop the best possible available, but again, available. Make these things available for people to opt into if they want to, but not sort of force people into anything or any sort of structure that doesn't make sense for them. So Orbit's all about different possibilities and different integrations. You can use Orbit with data availability on Ethereum. You can use Orbit with data availability in Celestia, Eigen, Espresso, Avail eventually, I'm sure. All these different integrations will be available in Arbitrum Orbit. And also different, technical innovations. We have teams that are basically just taking Orbit chains and slapping their brand on them, and that's their innovation, and that's fine. We have others that are doing really interesting things, like the Phoenix team that's going deep into the code and use advanced cryptography for privacy in their chain. You have teams like Hinto that are doing things with real world assets. You have teams like Frame that are doing things with creator royalties. Teams like Rarible, which actually just launched last week and had a fantastic first week. So shout out to Rari Chain. Really a great start. And again, great for creators. So many different possibilities, both for creators, for technical innovation, for ecosystem innovation in Arbitrum Orbit, and now with the Arbitrum expansion pack, even more that you can do. Another topic that I brought up last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, I don't remember, was this idea of TPS versus GPS. So TPS is, of course, transactions per second. GPS is gas per second. And I have this analogy. So if you know me at all, or even if you don't know me, but have seen me writing things on Twitter, you probably know that I like analogies a lot. And I actually particularly like this analogy, this idea of transactions per second is like me taking my wallet out and saying, hey, I have 10 bills. How many bills do you have in your wallet? And you say, I have 11 bills. And I say, okay, you have more money than I do because you have 11, I have 10. Now, it happens to be that among my 10 bills is a $100 bill and a $20 bill. So I have, maybe $128. And your bills are all singles, you have $11. So if you actually look at the bills, I have more money in my wallet potentially than this other wallet. But if you just count bills, you'll say, okay, you have 11, I have 10. And that's where it's a good analogy for how I think about TPS. Chains get so caught up in TPS, say, look, we could do 8 trillion transactions per second. We can do this number. And people like to throw out these numbers. But even assuming those numbers are correct, and 8 trillion is obviously an exaggeration. I haven't actually seen that one yet. But give it time. The point is that transactions is not a unit that makes much sense. It makes a lot of sense in different concepts. Like the concept of a transaction makes sense, but when measuring the capacity of a chain, transactions isn't that insightful, right? Like you can have a transaction that does very little work. You can have a complex transaction that does a ton of work. And if you're just counting transactions, it's kind of just like counting bills in your wallet. Like it doesn't tell you much about the capacity of the chain. But unfortunately, people use metrics like these to try to inform things like, oh, my chain is much more performant. It can do a lot more. It has more throughput. And the question is, so what can we do? Can we do better? So I proposed, and this is not, people have said this for the longest time, so this is not my original proposal, although I've been also saying it for a long time. Gas per second, particularly on chains that have the same gas metering, it's helpful. And you can say, okay, let's do something a little deeper. So we're going to look at not at the transaction per second, we're going to look at the gas usage. So a transaction that uses X gas and a transaction that uses 10X gas are not going to just both be counted as one unit. You're going to say, oh, this chain can do 10X more. If this chain is doing one transaction, this chain is doing one transaction, but this transaction is 10X more performant and it can do 10X more things, then you count that more. I think gas per second is helpful. It also has problems. Nothing here is perfect. For example, depending on the state, the amount of state in the system, different things can cost different amounts. Like data storage can become much more expensive, and gas sort of collapses all these things, and it doesn't really necessarily always show up. But even in terms of like different chains that have just different gas metering systems, it becomes hard to measure these things. And actually, I think the one thing that so there are a few different approaches you can use here. One interesting approach that's relatively simple is you can basically, and I was talking to Crypto is Cute on our team about this, and had the idea of basically just take a few different work streams that illustrate different sort of uses of the chain. So maybe one is like a swap, one is something more data heavy. You have 2, 3, 4, 5 different work streams, and say how many of those can these chains do per second? Because different chains will have different constraints, particularly for different VMs, and it's not always easy to compare them directly. So if you have a few different representative work actions, you can go ahead and say not how many transactions you do, how many swaps can you do, how many data accesses can you do, and you can go deeper in this and try to really measure the capacity of chains in a way that has more nuance. There are other approaches. When I posted this last week, I think Abdel from Starkware mentioned, hey, why don't we use user ops per second? That's another approach which many have discussed. And this really speaks to, this is a slightly different problem. And the idea is sometimes you have in different chains, particularly in chains that use account abstraction, you have these transactions that are actually bundles of different transactions, right? So you can have a single transaction, but it's actually a bundle that includes like 100 different swaps from maybe even 100 different users, all bundled up into a single transaction. Now it's clear that a transaction from one user and a transaction that bundles 100 users shouldn't be counted as one TPS, as one transaction. A simple TPS metric would probably do that and just say, okay, we have two transactions. Okay, but one has one swap and this one has 100 swaps. I don't know. They're just both one transaction. So clearly that's not doesn't make much sense. So at the very least, you should open up bundles and look and say, okay, how many distinct user operations are there? And I obviously agree with that. I think that that's better than just simple TPS. But even that, again, doesn't help that much because, okay, we unbundled it and now we have different user actions, but this user is sending tokens. This user is doing a super complex derivatives transaction. And, how can we count these both as one unit? And that's where things like gas per second, or things just like actually benchmarking individual use cases and having a bunch of them and taking some index of them of some sort really get you to better comparison. The point here is that there are a lot of different chains out there, and metrics are always gameable. And the better we make our metrics, they'll always be gameable. But the better you make metrics, the better we can be to really understanding how these different chains compare to one another. Because that's actually one of the things that I get most concerned about, which is particularly today, there's so many different options from core stack to data availability solutions. And you have this like exponential growth in different configurations. And at some point for users, it's definitely going to be exhausting. But even for developers, it's like, I don't know, I just have so many choices. And I think we need better metrics and better ways to compare these. And TPS, or capacity per chain, is one thing that needs to be measured. And I think we need to do a lot better than TPS. And I think actually we need to do this on many different metrics. Shout out to the awesome folks at L2B, DeFi Llama, that do a lot of this work to help you compare different chains and different growth or technical parameters. But again, I think as a community, we have a long way to go to make things simple for developers, because as options just continue to increase, it's just going to get more confusing for people. And our job is to simplify this for people and coming up with simple metrics that are less gameable and tell a much closer to the true story is a collective problem that we have as a community have. And it's one of the best things, because I love when you have these problems that you can just collaborate with. We tend to be pretty competitive in the blockchain community within Ethereum even, but certainly, as you look out to other chains. And I think this is one of those cases where we can all get together, and it serves us all to work together to come out with better metrics and better ways to measure our progress among one another. And it sort of makes, everyone does better there, because the battle then gets to actually improve yourself rather than to try to come up with some way to make a metric look like you're better, but to actually, okay, we have these defined metrics that are pretty good, and now let's put our heads down and actually try to make our technology the best. If we can do that, then everyone is better served. Okay. Moving on, we had, actually, I'll mention on the gas per second, Arbitrum Stylus is an interesting one. When we created Stylus, we added all sorts of new operations, these WASM operations. And what our team did was actually they went ahead and they had this like raw compute conversion where they measured they like a lot of measurement where we measured the typical Ethereum gas against Stylus gas. And they actually, how did they create a conversion table for these two? What they did was they actually had, the unit they use was like nanoseconds of computation. Like, okay, how much, this Ethereum op takes this many nanoseconds of computation on some machine. And that's therefore equivalent to this Stylus operation, which takes in, you can sort of build these for computation, at least you can build these sort of equivalency tables. So a lot of ways that you can do sort of bridge some of these gaps to make different systems and different ecosystems better and easier to compare. And I'll just do a shameless pitch for Arbitrum Stylus, which I think is going to be the absolutely best thing to hit blockchain development. It's already on testnet today, and you can go ahead and use Rust and C and C++, but not in ways that like, okay, I have my Rust contract and my Solidity contract, and they're kind of on the same chain. No. They're like really on the same chain. You can take your existing Solidity contract and update it to Rust, and the storage format still stays the same. So it's just a pure upgrade. You can go ahead and just take a Rust library or a C++ library and add it to your Solidity contract and call it synchronously. You can have a Rust contract and a Solidity contract talking to each other synchronously. Like, this is the real deal. It's going to make development easier for developers, more languages, more tools, safer for developers, because a lot of these languages have better safety. We built in like reentrancy turned off by default, but also they're more performant, and performance leads to safety, because one of the large risks of EVM development is people do these like really hand-coded optimizations in order to try to save off some cost. But if you have the Rust compiler and the C++ compiler that are better optimized to do some of these, you end up writing safer code. And the most important thing, in my opinion, about Stylus, it's not the language support, which is amazing. It's not even the safety, which is amazing. It's the scalability. It turns out that if you write a Stylus contract, and again, using the gas equivalency and the gas metering that we did to sort of make one unit for both of these, you get about a 10x increase in computational throughput. You get about 100x reduction in memory cost. Again, reduction in cost, increase in throughput are two sides of the same coin. And the point is that there's a lot more that you can do for a lot cheaper with Stylus. And as interest and demand in our ecosystem continues to grow, and I'm sure it's only going to continue growing, we are going to need all the scaling we can get. And I'm super excited for Stylus. Okay. I'm going to wrap up here with just a bunch of different questions that we had when I tweeted last week about this. So last call as well. If others want to add questions to that, I'm more than happy to take additional questions here. Just drop them right here in the StreamYard chat, and I am monitoring that. But to get to some of the ones that we had last week, let me just pull them up. Okay, so what is a skill that I took from my research career and still use today? So for those that don't know me, I started off as a researcher. I had my PhD from Princeton, and I also did a postdoc at Cornell, and then transitioned into the role at Offchain Labs, where we obviously, I'm a co-founder. We built a team, and now a lot more is management and managing the team. One of the main things that I took from my career was I was very fortunate to have really excellent mentors in terms of how to work with people and how to sort of align people to do their best work. As a researcher, I always felt that I had, I didn't feel like I was doing like, work that I didn't want to do, work I wasn't excited about. I had the freedom to work on things I'm excited about. And that's something we try to do inside Offchain Labs as well. When we hire people, we try to get them excited about what we're doing. Generally, we have people that are already excited applying for the roles, and get them just super excited about the ecosystem, about the space, about building. And then when you're really enjoying what you're doing, you're able to do your best work and it doesn't feel like a burden. And I think that's one of the secrets of our team is we're just the reason why we build and we ship so much faster than many others is because we're excited about what we're doing. We believe in the mission of what we're doing. We love what we do, and we just have to continue. We enjoy continuing. It doesn't feel like a burden. In fact, I generally don't ask people to work longer hours. I do sometimes tell people, hey, I think you should probably take a break. I know you love it, but it's important for everyone to sort of take a break sometimes. And that's sort of the fact that's sort of the culture here. Everyone just loves what they're doing so much, and really believes that we're changing the world, because we are. Okay, another question that came up, some comment on Treasure DAO. Yes, this is an important one, and one that I'm excited to discuss. Obviously, there was a little bit of drama in the community last week when there was proposals for Treasure DAO's new chain to launch in other ecosystems. And I think, it's a really important, I guess, reflection point, which is every team there, we at Offchain Labs, and as well as the Arbitrum Foundation, from everything I've seen, really try to empower developers and keep them in the ecosystem, not because they have to be here or they're somehow stuck here, but because it is the best ecosystem and the one which just enables teams to build and thrive. You have amazing teams like GMX on the DeFi side that just like and others, but I'll just talk about GMX on the DeFi side today that have done such incredible things and really thrives. And of course, on the gaming side, NFT side, you have teams like Treasure DAO that thrive. But there's nothing that's inherently locking them here, but they have to sort of keep, they're here because they want to be here. I think that's an important thing to remember, which is teams are here because they want to be here, and it's our job in the community and the ecosystem to create to make sure that teams want to be here. So I could say that I've loved working with the Treasure team for years now. I still, it's right here on screen, but also on socials, I always use my small brain. This is a prisoner pirate small brain, one that I'm very, very fond of. And my Twitter profile picture has been for years now. And I've been an early fan of that community. And the thing about the Arbitrum and the way that the community, I guess, embraces teams, it doesn't prioritize for big names. It doesn't look for teams that are now successful and say, oh, we're ready to talk to you now, you're successful. Instead, it tries to create the foundations to make those teams successful and make those teams grow. And Treasure obviously has always been a fantastic team, a team that has been able to execute, a team that has been able to build community in ways that are just amazing. And these two communities, the Arbitrum community and Treasure community, they're somewhat distinct, but also somewhat intertwined. And it's really a testament to the strength of both teams. And it's also, I have a lot of nostalgia as I think back. I remember I tweeted about this last week, the time where the Twitter account, the Arbitrum Twitter account that was back when it was on Off-Chain Labs control, went ahead and made the Arbitrum Small Brain, which, by the way, I absolutely love that custom small, the PFP for the entire Arbitrum ecosystem. And that's basically, I think, indicative of the way that and the role that Treasure has had. But it's also important to remember that, you have to constantly put an effort and constantly, make sure that you're always welcoming. And I know from our perspective of Off-Chain, we talk to the Treasure team often and regularly, and always try to create that environment. And maybe sometimes it goes without saying, but it's obvious because it's obvious to us. But maybe it should be said more of how much we are looking to align. How much, we believe with Treasure, we feel aligned with them, and we feel that they are a critical part of the ecosystem. I think gaming as a whole, I'll say, is a more nascent, earlier part of the ecosystem than, say, DeFi. And so that might lead people to feel like DeFi has a bigger role. But I think that's true, like, just globally, that gaming got a little bit of a later start. But it's not that it's less important. In fact, in the Arbitrum ecosystem, there's an entire chain, Arbitrum Nova, which is dedicated to gaming. And Nova sometimes doesn't get all the attention that it needs or that it deserves, potentially, because games don't necessarily have the same metrics that people look at, right? If you're looking at TVL, sure, the DeFi chains are going to dominate because that's not the metric of importance for a chain. But if you look at the ecosystem, we have so many fantastic partners building, Proof of Play, Pirate Nation, doing incredible things in on-chain gaming, Treasure, of course, and all the games on Treasure really playing a foundational and fundamental role, not only in Arbitrum gaming, but in blockchain gaming. You have teams like ZTX, you have teams like Zai that are all doing, in their own corner, really important things in gaming. And I think the Arbitrum ecosystem is one that's going to be a conglomerate of many, many different gaming efforts, and one that we care about a lot. And I guess I'll launch some alpha here today. I'll drop some alpha, I should say, here today, which is there is an Odyssey V2, not called that, being planned. And it is heavily focused on gaming. In fact, it's all about gaming, and that is going to be released in the next few weeks, and it's super exciting. So gaming is absolutely a priority for the ecosystem, and one in which is a priority, I think, for me personally. And Treasure is a cornerstone of the Arbitrum ecosystem, and I'm hopeful, and I'm excited to continue to work with them for a very, very long time as we build out the ecosystem and connect and together build out the importance of the Arbitrum gaming ecosystem generally, and build out the role of Treasure in that ecosystem. So excited to work with the Treasure team. Just one other question that I see here that I'll take, which is what is the necessity of tokens in layer 2 solutions? This is an interesting question. It's a technical question, really, but it's a fascinating one. And the answer is, it really comes down to one word, and that word is upgradability. So you go ahead and you launch a layer 2, and it's the best layer 2 that exists today. It's running, like, let's say, the Arbitrum Nitro technology stack. It's running everything, all the latest technology, but you know that, like, in time, there will be new developments and improvements that you can make that will make that stack even better, right? So things like Arbitrum Stylus. If you would have locked your chain in time and not made it upgradable, Arbitrum Stylus runs around, then now you have a problem because your chain is just, you can't upgrade it. Now, there are two approaches you can take here. You can take an approach like Uniswap does on the app layer, which is your protocol is immutable, and you say, okay, if you want to launch Stylus, you have to create a new chain and migrate over there. Now, while that works reasonably well for on the app layer where you're migrating liquidity, it doesn't work that well on a chain where you have just historic state and so much built up here and so many different on-chain relationships and infrastructure that exist. It's not easy for the whole chain and liquidity, of course, to just jump to a new chain. It just doesn't work that way. And therefore, the other thing is, the other alternative that becomes the one you need is upgradability. You need the ability to upgrade the chain. And then the question is, okay, so who controls the upgradability? And the answer is, if you don't want it to be centralized, if you want it to be decentralized, then you need a mechanism to put it in the hands of the community. And that's the importance from a technical perspective, the critical importance of having an L2 token. It gives the community the ability to control the future of the chain and make sure that the chain is not locked in time and can't, because if it is locked in time, it's just a matter of time till some other chain comes along with much better features and sort of takes over. So you want it to be a living protocol that can upgrade itself, but also you want that to be decentralized, and that's the key motivation for on a layer 2 tokens and layer 2 governance and upgradability generally. And the Arbitrum DAO is a really fantastic experiment in decentralized control of both the technology, the parameterization of the technology, the treasury. I think it's a really unique experiment, particularly among L2s. I don't think there's any other one that gives so much control to the community. The Arbitrum DAO Foundation, there's definitely a lot of different places where the DAO can improve, and the foundation can improve. Everyone can always improve, and I think the community's involvement there is helpful. How do you make things more efficient over time? But ultimately, I think some of that chaos that you might see now is because it actually is decentralized. There actually are different opinions. People care deeply, and that's when you get sort of debate, and you have this process that it might look a little chaotic. But if it puts the hands in control of real people, and real people have real opinions on things they care deeply about, you're going to actually get debate and disagreement sometime. But that's, in my opinion, the process working well. Not to be said that there might be places where there can be more efficiency, and I think there definitely are conversations to have about that with the DAO. But ultimately, I think there is no alternative or substitute for decentralization. Decentralization comes with that. It's decentralization. You have decentralized opinion making. You have different opinions that need to come together. And I fundamentally love to see all the work the Arbitrum DAO has done. So with that, I'm going to wrap for today. I'm going to do this again probably in a week or two. So I will post again on Twitter, where you can go ahead and post questions or topics for me to cover. Really great to hang out here today. Excited for next time. Until then, see ya. Oh, and the last thing I got was a request for an E. So here you go. E, have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.